I bought this ranch to escape people like her clipboard queens who think a badge and a golf cart make them sheriff. At sunrise, coffee in hand, I stepped onto my porch and heard a megaphone bark. You are surrounded. 4 cruisers at my gate, guns drawn, and behind them Sabrina Klein, Oak Ridge Summit's HOA tyrant, smirking like she'd just annexed my front yard. One problem, my deed says I'm not in their HOA. I paid a lawyer to tattoo that fact in ink. So why were cops on my gravel demanding I come down slow hands high like I'd robbed the sunrise? That's when the wind shifted and I smelled it hot, metal faint smoke right where my backup generator sits beside my dog's tether. Someone wanted fire panic headlines. They forgot one thing: I don't scare. I document. Before we dive in, drop your location and local time in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Now let me show you how HOA power trips explode when they hit a boundary line called mine. When people picture country living, they imagine peace, sun spilling over the fields, a couple of dogs chasing each other across dew-wet grass, the kind of silence where you can actually hear your own thoughts. That's exactly what I'd been craving when I left the city behind. After 15 years of concrete deadlines and constant emails, I sold my engineering firm and bought 20 acres on the edge of Oak Ridge Valley. I wanted fresh eggs, quiet mornings, and the satisfaction of building something with my own hands. What I didn't expect was waking up one morning to the sound of amplified commands and the sight of 4 sheriff cruisers parked at my gate as if I were some kind of fugitive. I still remember the shock of that moment. The coffee was hot in my hand, the mug sweating against my palm, and yet my skin went cold when I saw the deputies crouched with their weapons up. I was barefoot, wearing nothing but plaid boxers, blinking against the sun like a man who had walked into the wrong movie set. Then my eyes locked on her. Sabrina Klein, Queen of Oak Ridge Summit, HOA, arms folded, green silk blouse glowing against the morning light, perched proudly beside a spotless white golf cart. The laminated badge on her collar gleamed like she was some kind of government official. Her smirk told me everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. "Sir, come down slowly," the megaphone voice repeated. The deputies weren't joking. They thought they had probable cause, and I knew exactly who had given them that: Sabrina. What made it laughable, if it hadn't been so terrifying, was that my land wasn't even under her HOA's jurisdiction. When I bought the property, I made sure of that. My deed carried a formal waiver, stamped and filed with the county, stating this was not HOA-bound land. I had even paid an extra retainer to my lawyer, Jonah Patel, to double verify. I'd wanted absolute freedom. So how did I end up with sheriff's deputies pointing rifles at my gate? The answer went back a few weeks to the first signs of intrusion. It started with the drones. At first, I thought it was just some teenager messing around with his new toy. A white quadcopter buzzing over the barn roof at 7 in the morning seemed annoying but not criminal. Then it showed up the next day. Same time, same hover. Day 3 again. By day 4, I lost patience and brought out the BB gun. Down it went, scattering plastic and wiring into the grass. I felt satisfied for about an hour, until there was a knock at my door. That's when I met Sabrina face to face. She had the kind of smile you see on realtors, bright white, polished, but her eyes were pure wolf. "You must be the new neighbor," she said, clipboard in hand, pearls around her neck. "Ethan Ward," I introduced myself, extending a hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she shoved a manila folder against my chest. "We've already had several complaints. Unauthorized structures, noise violations, non-approved fencing. You've also exceeded residential tolerance for livestock." I remember blinking at her. "I have 3 hens and 1 rooster. That's it." "We heard it," she replied sharply, scribbling something on her pad. I flipped open the folder. Inside wasn't a welcome packet, but a printed list of fines and mandatory corrections. Every one of them assumed my ranch was under HOA authority. "I'm not part of Oak Ridge Summit," I said evenly. My realtor and lawyer confirmed it. Her smile widened. "That's what they told you. I'm sure we can work something out." That was the beginning. I ignored the folder. I ignored the letters she left in my mailbox. I even ignored the so-called mandatory orientation notice taped to my gate. But she didn't stop. Within 2 weeks, I was receiving official-looking fines for everything from leaving my porch light on overnight to planting tomatoes outside of designated landscaping zones. Packages started disappearing from my front step. Mail arrived days late. My garden beds were trampled one morning, footprints leading straight from the road. That's when I installed cameras. Motion-activated night vision, cloud synced. 2 nights later at 3:21 a.m., the lens caught her golf cart parked at the edge of the ridge, headlights off. Sabrina herself was visible in the driver's seat, staring at my property like a general plotting a siege. I marched straight to the sheriff's office with the footage. The deputy on duty chuckled. That's just Sabrina. She's enthusiastic. He promised to have a word, but no report was filed. I walked out of that office with a knot in my chest. No one was going to protect me. I was on my own. That was the low point. The point where paranoia started to creep in. Every creak of the house felt like trespass. Every rustle in the woods felt like surveillance. I had left the city to escape noise, but now the silence itself felt dangerous. Jonah, my lawyer, was the only one who took it seriously. He examined the boundaries again, checked county plat maps, reviewed my deed. She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, he said, but she's bold. If she's using HOA resources to harass you, we can go after her. Document everything. So I built my defenses. A 10-foot fence with reflective private property, not HOA signs at every entry point. Floodlights with motion sensors. New locks on the tool shed. A steel mailbox with security features. My 2 Labradors, Ranger and Mocha, became my shadows. I thought I'd finally drawn a line she wouldn't cross. I was wrong. The next escalation came disguised as bureaucracy. Sabrina filed a complaint with the county claiming I had erected commercial structures on residential land. She pointed at my solar panels and chicken coop as if they were a casino and a strip mall. Then, as if that weren't enough, she accused me of storing illegal equipment in my barn. When the sheriff's department showed up with a courtesy notice, I laughed bitterly. Illegal equipment, like what, explosives, one deputy said flatly. I nearly dropped my coffee. My barn contained nothing more than a chainsaw, a mower, and a couple of propane tanks for grilling. Nothing anyone could mistake for explosives unless they had been on my property snooping or inventing lies from thin air. I told them to check the shed themselves. They did, and of course they found nothing. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because just as they were leaving, Ranger started barking his hackles up. He never barked unless there was real danger. I turned and saw a thin stream of smoke rising from behind the barn. My blood went cold. I sprinted across the yard gravel, stabbing my bare feet, heart pounding like a drum. Behind the barn, the backup generator sat smoldering. A greasy rag poked halfway out of the fuel vent, the edges blackened. Someone had stuffed it in there and tried to ignite it. 10 feet away, Mocha was tied to the water spigot post leash, tangled tight. His eyes were wide, panicked, pulling with all his might to get free. If that rag had caught fully, he would have gone up with it. I grabbed the bucket by the rain barrel and doused the generator until the hissing steam died down. Then I fell to my knees, clutching Mocha's trembling body. My hands reeked of smoke and gasoline. That wasn't vandalism anymore. That was attempted arson. And it wasn't just aimed at me, it was aimed at killing my dog. When I staggered back around to the front yard, the deputies' guns were lowered, their radios crackling. One had already called in a fire investigator. Another looked visibly shaken. For the first time, they didn't seem so sure of Sabrina. I turned to face her. The smug smile she'd worn earlier had thinned into a twitch. For the first time, she looked rattled. "Is this how you treat people who aren't in your club?" I demanded, smoke still curling behind me. By planting evidence, calling in fake tips, and nearly burning a dog alive, she didn't answer. The lead deputy stepped forward, his tone softer now. "Sir, we may need a formal statement. This is starting to look like criminal mischief." You think I snapped? That was the moment I knew the game had changed. This wasn't about noisy roosters or unapproved fencing. Sabrina had crossed a line into open warfare. And if she thought I was going to roll over, she didn't know me at all. Because I wasn't just fighting for peace anymore. I was fighting for my land, my animals, my life. And I was ready to hit back with everything I had. The night after the smoke incident, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Ranger, and Mocha curled up at my feet, replaying every detail in my mind. The rag in the generator, the thin trail of smoke, the way Sabrina's smile twitched when I confronted her, it all told me one thing. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It was a calculated attack. The fire investigator came the next morning. He wore a crisp uniform with a county badge, and had the slow, methodical gait of someone who had seen far too many burned-out shells of barns in his career. He crouched beside the generator, poked at the blackened rag with a pen, and frowned. "Somebody stuffed this deliberately," he said. "You're lucky the fuel didn't catch." I nodded grimly. "And my dog was tied 10 feet away." He looked up, eyes hardening. "That's not vandalism. That's cruelty, maybe attempted arson. I'll file the report." For the first time, I felt like someone official actually believed me. But belief alone wouldn't keep my land safe. Sabrina had crossed from petty to dangerous, and I knew the only weapon strong enough against her wasn't just a fence, it was documentation. Jonah, my lawyer, drove out that afternoon, in his dusty silver SUV. He was younger than me, early 30s, with sharp features and the kind of calm that made judges listen. He walked the property slowly, jotting notes, snapping photos with his phone, and muttering under his breath about clear trespass, reckless endangerment, and civil liability. "This is good," he said, finally pointing at the scorch marks. "Well, not good, but it helps us. With this, we're not just talking harassment anymore. We're talking criminal mischief, maybe conspiracy if she had help. I've got cameras," I reminded him. "They're cloud-backed. Every trespass, every golf cart, every drone, I'm recording it all." He smiled faintly. "Perfect. Keep backing it up. Build your case like you'd build a fence, sturdy, no gaps." That's exactly what I did. Over the next week, my ranch turned into something between a fortress and a film set. I installed 7 more cameras each with overlapping angles. Motion lights glared like stadium beams across the yard. I hammered reflective metal signs along the fence line that read in bold black letters, "Private property, not HOA jurisdiction." Every mailbox, every gate, every post carried the same message. But Sabrina didn't back off. She escalated. 2 days later, a courier delivered an official-looking envelope. Inside was a formal notice of violation stamped with Oak Ridge Summit HOA's seal. It accused me of erecting commercial structures and endangering the community with unsafe equipment. Attached was a fine schedule over $7, 0 inches penalties. I laughed out loud. Then I called Jonah. "She's filing HOA fines against a property not in her jurisdiction," I told him. "That's fraud, right?" "It's at least overreach," he replied dryly. "Send me copies. We'll use them." That night, as if to prove she wasn't finished, another drone buzzed overhead. This one was smaller, quieter, hovering like a ghost above the barn. I didn't shoot it down this time. I tracked it. My cameras followed it until it veered off toward Oak Ridge Summit's manicured cul-de-sacs. Jonah called the next morning. "If she's funding drones with HOA money, that's misappropriation. County officials will care about that. They won't ignore misuse of funds." The words gave me a strange comfort. Not because I trusted the system completely, but because I knew Sabrina had finally stepped into territory she couldn't smile her way out of. But the comfort didn't last long. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, I heard Ranger growl low near the fence line. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. There, half hidden in the twilight, I spotted footprints pressed into the soft earth. Fresh. 2 sets. They led from the road straight toward the barn, then back again. I followed the trail, cautiously, shotgun slung across my shoulder. The prints were heavy, as if whoever had made them was carrying something. By the feed bins, I found drag marks like a crate or sack had been pulled across the dirt. My stomach dropped. I sprinted to the chicken coop. The door was wide open. Inside, silence. Not a single feather, not a single hen. My 12 birds, 2 roosters, 10 hens were gone. For a moment, I just stood there, fist clenched, jaw tight. Those birds weren't just livestock. They were part of my routine, my peace. Their morning clucks were the soundtrack of my new life. And now, stolen in the night, they were gone. I snapped photos, called the sheriff, and filed another report. A deputy came, shined a flashlight into the empty coop, scribbled notes, and shrugged. No witnesses, no cameras caught the theft. Hard to pin it on anyone. I wanted to scream. Instead, I thanked him, closed the gate, and walked back inside. Jonah called that night. His voice was calm, but beneath it I heard steel. "Ethan, this isn't random anymore. Chickens don't vanish without motive. This is intimidation." "Exactly," I said. "She's not just trying to find me, she's trying to break me. Well, we're not going to let her." The next morning, Jonah filed the first civil suit: harassment, trespassing, destruction of property. He also requested an emergency restraining order against Sabrina and her known associates. The paperwork was dense, the language dry, but the intent was clear. We weren't playing defense anymore. But Sabrina had her own playbook. 2 days later, I received another envelope, this time hand-delivered. It accused me of creating a hostile environment for HOA officials and endangering the welfare of the community. The audacity almost made me laugh. She had burned my generator, stolen my chickens, and now she was accusing me of being dangerous. That night I did something new. I sat down with my laptop, opened YouTube, and typed HOA abuse stories. I found a Texas-based channel called HOA Exposed, run by a man named Brandon Cole. His videos had titles like "HOA Tried to Bulldoze My Barn" and "Karen HOA President Calls Cops Regrets It." His comment sections were flooded with people sharing their own nightmares. I clicked contact. 2 days later, Brandon was sitting on my porch, camera gear set up, microphone clipped to my shirt. Ranger and Mocha lay at my feet, Behind me, the empty chicken coop loomed like a crime scene. I told my story, every detail. The drones, the fake finds, the generator, the chickens. Brandon filmed it all, shaking his head in disbelief. That night, the video went live. HOA sends cops to man's ranch, but he's not in the HOA. Within hours, it went viral. Tens of thousands of views. Comments poured in, "That's not an HOA, that's a cartel." I live near Oak Ridge Summit. This doesn't surprise me. She needs to be arrested like yesterday. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. My fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was public. And that terrified Sabrina. Because the next morning I found something on my porch. A small black box, no return address. Inside a dead sparrow, its neck twisted, dried blood around its beak. Beneath it, a photograph, an aerial shot of my ranch dated 2 nights ago. Another drone, another violation, another threat. I stared at the photo for a long time, then whispered to myself, she's not just playing HOA games anymore, she's waging war. When I opened that black box and saw the twisted sparrow, my stomach knotted in a way I hadn't felt since my father's funeral. It wasn't just the dead bird, it was the photograph beneath it. A crisp aerial shot of my ranch zoomed right in on the guesthouse window timestamped 2 nights ago. Someone had flown a drone over my land again, after the fire, after the chickens, after the cops. And now they were leaving trophies on my porch like a hunter taunting his prey. I set the box down on the kitchen table and just stared. The message was clear. We see you. We own the sky. You can't hide. Ranger paced beside me, tail-stiff ears twitching toward every creak of the house. Mocha pressed close against my leg, trembling as if he could feel the tension rolling off me. I grabbed my phone and called Jonah. He picked up on the second ring, voice groggy but alert. What happened? They left me a gift, I said. Dead bird, drone photo, timestamps from this week. There was a pause then, his tone hardened. That's criminal stalking, Ethan. You need to keep that box exactly as you found it. Don't toss anything. I'll be there in an hour. By the time Jonah arrived, the sun was rising, painting long shadows across the pasture. He wore jeans, a hoodie, and latex gloves he'd picked up from a gas station pharmacy. He carefully lifted the bird out of the box, grimaced, then pulled out the photograph. His eyes scanned it quickly, then he held it up to the light. This isn't HOA nonsense anymore, he said. This is intimidation. This is organized. I sank into a chair, rubbing my temples. And what if it's not just intimidation? What if they're planning something worse? Jonah set the photo down gently. Then we treat this like what it is, a criminal conspiracy. You're not alone anymore. The sheriff's office has already opened a case. Let's add this to the pile. I wanted to believe him. But later that night, sitting in the dark with only the dogs for company, I couldn't shake the image of that sparrow. Its neck twisted like someone was sending me a preview of my own fate. At 4 a.m., I heard the crunch of gravel outside. I shot upright, shotgun in hand, heart pounding. The porch light flicked on automatically, but nothing moved. Just the wind. I sat back down, but I didn't sleep again. The next morning, Deputy Ramirez called. Ethan, we need you to come down to the station. We think we've got something. I drove into town, the black box sealed in a bag on the passenger seat. At the station, Ramirez slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside was a printout from one of my cameras, the one that had caught the figure in a hoodie, sneaking up the drive at 3:42 a.m. the week before. We ran the plate of a vehicle parked half-hidden down the road that same night, Ramirez explained. Black SUV, registered to a man named Aaron Hines. The name hit me like a hammer. Jonah had already mentioned it once, Sabrina's cousin, the same man who'd been kicked off the HOA board years ago for running a fake security initiative. You're telling me her family is stalking me, I asked. Ramirez leaned back, folding his arms. Looks that way. We're still building the case, but the ties are strong. When I got home, Jonah was waiting on the porch. He'd already heard. This connects the dots, he said. Sabrina doesn't just have influence. She's got muscle. Aaron's her fixer. That night, I called Brandon Cole, the YouTuber who'd filmed my first interview. You want an exclusive follow-up, I asked. He was at my ranch the next morning. This time we filmed inside my kitchen. The black box sat in the center of the table, the sparrow still sealed in evidence bags. Brandon filmed the photo, the scorch marks by the generator, the empty chicken coop. He looked shaken but also excited. This is bigger than HOA drama, he said. This is corruption. When the video went live, it exploded. 500,000 views in 2 days. Comments poured in from all over the country. This HOA president should be in prison. They're acting like a cartel. I had the same thing happen in Arizona. Drones, fake fines, intimidation. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just my fight. There were others. And then, just as the video was trending, she showed up. Not Sabrina this time, but a woman in her early 30s, denim jacket, nervous hands twisting as she stood at my gate. "My name's Lena Morales," she said when I walked out. "I used to work for Sabrina on the HOA board." She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. "I saw your video. I think I have something you need to see." We sat at my kitchen table. She slid a flash drive across the wood. She made us all sign NDAs, but I don't care anymore. On here, emails, drone logs, surveillance photos, even templates for violation letters. She called it the non-compliant file. I stared at her. "You're telling me she's been keeping a dossier on people?" Lena nodded. "Your name's on it. With photos, notes. She knew you weren't in the HOA. She told us you were a threat because you set a precedent. If you got away with ignoring her, others might too." I felt my jaw tighten. "What about Aaron?" Her face paled. "She calls him her cleanup guy. If there's a problem, she sends him." I leaned back, breath heavy. The puzzle was snapping into place. Sabrina wasn't just power tripping. She was running an intimidation racket using HOA funds as her personal war chest. I copied the flash drive onto an encrypted folder and sent it to Jonah and the county prosecutor. For the first time, I felt like we had the smoking gun. But relief was short-lived, because just as Lena was leaving, her eyes darted to the window. "That car," she whispered. I turned. Across the road, a black SUV sat idling. Behind the wheel, a man in sunglasses stared straight at the house. "That's him," Lena said, voice shaking. "That's Aaron." Before I could react, the SUV revved and peeled away, gravel spraying into the air. I stood frozen in the doorway, shotgun in hand, rage boiling in my chest. He wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was watching my house while I was inside, daring me to step out of line. That night, as I locked the barn and double-checked the cameras, I realized something chilling. Sabrina wasn't the only problem. She was just the face. Behind her, there was a network. People with money, people with muscle, people who thought they could own the land and silence the rest of us. And if I didn't fight back hard enough, my ranch wouldn't just be harassed. It would disappear like the other properties Lena had hinted at. I looked out across the dark pasture, the dogs pacing restlessly at my side, and made a promise to myself. They wanted a war. Then they'd get one. The week after Lena handed over the flash drive felt like a pressure cooker. Every morning began with a ritual coffee check, the camera feed sync backups, and then a call to Jonah to go over anything new. The more we dug, the worse it looked. The flash drive was a treasure trove of nastiness emails with attachments that read like a how-to manual for harassment, drone flight logs time-stamped in the dead of night, payment records that lined up with anonymous security, consultants, and a spreadsheet labeled non-compliant file with names, photos, notes, and suggested remediation strategies. My name was there, circled in red with a note, potential precedent, monitor. Beneath it, other names, some I recognized from the county records, others I didn't. Jonah and I sat in the kitchen for hours going through every file. He highlighted dates, matched invoices to bank transfers, and annotated the drone footage frame by frame. "This is fraud plus conspiracy," he said at one point, pinching the bridge of his nose. "If the prosecutor sees this, they'll convene a grand jury." The sheriff's office was already moving. Deputy Ramirez called me into a small evidence room midweek. He laid photographs out on a table like a journalist arranging a storyboard. On top was a clear image, the drone I'd downed with the BB gun, its propellers snapped, wires splayed, but with one intact micro SD card. Ramirez slid the card toward me. "We got a lab to pull the footage. You weren't the only target." The footage was worse than I imagined. It showed multiple flights over my property, sure, but it also showed missions over other ranches that matched the list on the spreadsheet. The cameras were zoomed in on house windows, on livestock pens, on porches where people slept. In one clip, a white golf cart idled on a neighbor's road while the drone hovered recording. In another, two figures in hoodies moved across a backfield dragging a crate. The lab flagged audio, two muffled radio chatter, a woman's voice giving coordinates, and the crackle of someone saying, "He's live on the west fence." The voice sounded eerily like the recordings Lena had given us. Ramirez tapped a printout. "This ties the drone ops to the HOA ring. We've got enough to ask for a search warrant at their offices and at certain associated properties." When Jonah learned this, he was all business. He drafted a press release to go out the moment the sheriff executed any action, a crisp statement about harassment, misuse of HOA funds, organized surveillance, and potential criminal charges. He wanted the public to know that this was not a private feud, it was a pattern of criminal behavior. Brandon the YouTuber agreed to stream live and interview neighbors. Lena signed an affidavit. The county prosecutor reviewed the files, and after an anxious 24 hours, breathed out a single word: authorize. We chose a Thursday. Early morning before sunup, the kind of hour where a quiet town feels most betrayed when law enforcement shows up heavy. I sat on the porch with my coffee cooling in my hands, the dog's closed cameras rolling. Jonah stood by the gate in his hoodie, scanning the road phone held like a talisman. Deputy Ramirez texted, "They're on approach." The convoy rolled up like a thunderhead. County deputies in windbreakers, tactical gear hidden under jackets, plainclothes, investigators, and a pair of white vans stamped with the county seal. They fanned across the HOA compound file cabinets, the clubhouse, that spotless golf cart, and a storage shed that smelled faintly of oil and burned plastic. Officers moved like bees, efficient, focused, and unstoppable. I watched Sabrina through the porch camera feed. For once, she wasn't preening. Her lipstick was smudged, her pearls were half-kilter, and the eyes I'd watched gloat so often were pale with calculation. She stood on the clubhouse steps as deputies walked in and began seizing hard drives, phones, and stacks of invoices. When an officer read her rights, her hand fluttered to the laminated HOA badge pinned to her blouse like a talisman that had lost its magic. Inside the clubhouse, they found the files Lena described: digital backups, printed violation templates, and a ledger of payments to third parties listed as security consultants. One of the investigators pulled out a stack of canceled checks. The payee, a small private firm registered in a neighboring county, its bank account showing transfers labeled community safety, but the invoices pointed to drone ops, surveillance equipment, and unmarked outreach. The deputy looked up, eyes meeting Jonah's through the door. This isn't just petty oversight. This is embezzlement. Outside word spread faster than the sheriff's PA system. Neighbors gathered like a crowd at a courthouse lawn. Some held their phones high filming. Others whispered. Brandon Cole arrived with a crew camera rolling microphone thrust forward. He knew how to craft a narrative, and within minutes a live feed was amplifying the story to viewers across the state. HOA raided for surveillance and harassment flashed the headline across thousands of screens. Sabrina was escorted from the property in handcuffs. She didn't scream. She was too practiced in that quiet, icy composure to give the cameras a show. Her lawyer showed up a few hours later with a stack of papers and a fury that looked like legal oxygen, ready to file countersuits to scream jurisdictional overreach and procedural errors. But the county had evidence logs, financial trails, drone footage, and witness testimony. Back at my ranch, as the sun rose higher and the press vans started to leave for the courthouse, Ramirez called me over. He pinned a printout to the hood of his vehicle, an image from the recovered drone footage showing two men loading crates near a neighboring property. One of them, Ramirez said, matched the description of Aaron Hines. "We've got probable cause to go after him next," Ramirez said. "We're not done." Seeing Sabrina in cuffs was cathartic in a way I can't really explain. It didn't erase the nights I'd sat awake listening for steps, or the chickens that never came back, or the box with the dead bird on my porch. But it shifted the weight. The fight was no longer just mine. The county was invested, the press was watching, and people who had been silenced for years were stepping forward. Still, there were cracks. The HOA lawyer pushed back hard, attempting to frame the county's actions as political theater and overreach, egged on by an online mob. They filed motions to suppress evidence, to accuse the sheriff of mishandling property, to claim that some of the files were taken out of context. The defense's PR team rolled out a narrative. Sabrina was a committed community leader being scapegoated for administrative missteps. It was the classic playbook: deny, obfuscate, slow the wheels of justice until the waves of outrage died down. Jonah anticipated this. He and Ramirez met with the prosecutor and presented a timeline so tight it left little room for spin. The receipts matched the flights, the drone timestamps matched the complaint logs. The bank transfers matched the check stubs and invoices. It was a chain paper pixel witness that started at the HOA office and led right to Sabrina's desk. By evening, a judge had signed off on a set of indictments: fraudulent misappropriation of HOA funds, conspiracy to commit harassment, unlawful surveillance, and several counts of criminal trespass, and attempted arson pending further investigation into the generator incident and the stolen chickens. Sabrina was booked. She sat in a holding cell with the same pearls, now dull and foreign-looking against the harsh fluorescent light. But even as the courthouse lights burned late and the first filings rolled in, I couldn't stop thinking about Aaron, about the black SUV that watched my home, and about the woman who had dropped the map with the 5 X's. Sabrina might be behind bars, but the network she was part of, the people who profited from creating fear and buying property at depressed prices, was still out there humming like a hive. That night, I walked the perimeter of my ranch with a flashlight and the dogs. The cameras blinked red their lenses, reflecting the beam like watchful eyes. I stopped at the gate and stared out across the dark road toward Oak Ridge Summit. The clubhouse lights were off, the manicured lawns empty. For the first time in months, I felt some of the fog lift. The raid had been a turning point. The fight had been exposed. But there was no triumphant music. Just the low, steady sound of wind through the grass, the distant hum of a highway, and the knowledge that justice wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a process that would be long, messy, and far from guaranteed. We'd won a battle today. The war I suspected was only getting started. The morning after the raid, the ranch was unusually still. Ranger and Mocha lay sprawled on the porch, snoring softly as if they too finally believed the danger had passed. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself the luxury of silence, of coffee, sipped without scanning the tree line every 2 seconds. But peace doesn't last long when you've stirred up a hornet's nest. By noon, the phone calls started. Some were neighbors I'd never spoken to, thanking me for standing up to Sabrina. Others were strangers who had seen Brandon Cole's viral video and wanted to share their own HOA nightmares. One man from Arizona told me his HOA had threatened to fine him $500 a day until he painted his shed desert beige. A woman from Florida said her board had demanded she remove her vegetable garden because it wasn't aesthetically compliant. The flood of stories made one thing clear: Sabrina was just one face of a much larger sickness. But not all calls were supportive. A few came from blocked numbers, raspy voices, warning me to drop it or mind your own land. One message was just static, then a low chuckle before the line cut off. I played it back twice, then saved it in a separate folder. I wasn't going to ignore intimidation anymore. That evening, Jonah returned with more news. He had met with the prosecutor and reviewed the files from the flash drive. "This goes deeper than we thought," he said, laying papers across my kitchen table. "These payments to the so-called security firm, they tie back to a larger entity. It looks like they funneled HOA funds into something called Merge Municipal Expansion and Reclamation Group Enterprise." I frowned. "That sounds like a government project." Jonah shook his head. "Private. They masquerade as consultants for HOAs, city councils, even county boards. Their model is simple pressure homeowners who live outside or resist HOA rules until they either sell cheap or give up. Then they move in, consolidate the land, and flip it for development contracts." The realization hit me like a slap. Sabrina wasn't just a power-hungry busybody. She was a pawn in a larger game, a queen maybe, but still just one piece. "Merge," I muttered, "and we've just kicked their mascot off the board." Jonah nodded grimly. "Which means they'll send someone else." His words proved true sooner than I imagined. 3 nights later, at precisely 2, 4, 7 a.m., my north-facing camera pinged. I sat up in bed, heart-racing, tablet in hand. The feed showed a lone figure moving along the fence line. This wasn't Aaron. Too small, too deliberate. The person wore all black, hood up, gloves, face hidden. But what chilled me most was the confidence in their movements. They weren't sneaking. They were placing something on each fence post. I threw on jeans, grabbed the shotgun, and slipped out the side door with Ranger at my heel. The night air was sharp, the field hushed, except for the faint hum of insects. I crept closer until my flashlight beam caught the intruder square in the chest. "Hey, you're on private property," I barked. The figure froze, then turned slowly. For a heartbeat, our eyes met, hers sharp and calculating beneath the hood. She smiled. Not fear, not surprise, just a smile. "You think Sabrina was the end," she said softly. My finger tightened on the trigger. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she dropped something to the ground, a small envelope, and bolted into the trees. Ranger lunged after her, but I yanked him back, afraid of an ambush. When I picked up the envelope, my hands trembled. Inside was a folded letter and a flash drive. The letter read, "Tammy was Phase 1. This land is already claimed." I stood there under the moonlight, the words burning into my skull. Whoever she was, she hadn't come to vandalize. She'd come to deliver a message. Back inside, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop with Jonah on speakerphone. Folder after folder appeared: maps, emails, audio recordings. The maps showed 5 properties marked with bold red X's. 4 were already annotated with the word resolved. My ranch was the 5th. "Resolved," I whispered. "What does that even mean?" Jonah's voice was grim. "It means the others either sold, fled, or were forced out." We cross-referenced the addresses. One was a goat farm, abandoned 3 months ago, foreclosed under suspicious circumstances. Another was a small horse rescue owner bankrupt after repeated fines and code violations. A third property had burned to the ground last year. Officially an accident, but the file labeled it cleared. The fourth was a family cottage vacated after the garage mysteriously caught fire. Each one was outside HOA jurisdiction. Each one had been targeted until the owners gave up. And now my ranch was next on the list. I sat back, hands gripping my hair. So it was never about my rooster, my fence, or my porch light. They wanted the land. Jonah didn't hesitate. Exactly. They want control. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. The next day, the sheriff's office officially escalated my case to a county task force. Prosecutors started drafting new charges, not just against Sabrina, but against the unnamed firm tied to Merge. Still, a gnawing unease followed me everywhere. Sabrina was in custody, yes. But the woman at my fence line, Aaron in his black SUV, and whoever else was in this shadowy network, they were still out there. Later that week, Brandon returned to film another update. This time, I didn't sit calmly on the porch. I stood by the chicken coop, its door still hanging open, feathers scattered like evidence. I held up the envelope and the letter. They say this land is already claimed. But I've got news for them. It's mine, and I'm not going anywhere. The video exploded online. Viewers were outraged. Some compared Merge to a land grab cartel. Others offered to camp on my property with their own firearms to help guard it. A few even said they lived near Oak Ridge Summit and had their own run-ins with Sabrina. The comment that stuck with me most read, "They don't want your chickens, they want the deed." As the sun set that night, I checked the envelope again. The woman's words echoed in my head. Sabrina was phase 1. That meant there was a phase 2, and I had no doubt it was coming for me. They called it a task force by day and a witch hunt by some of the HOA defenders on the internet, but to me it felt like the closest thing to a shield I'd had since this whole nightmare began. The county assembled people from the sheriff's office, the state attorney's cyber unit, and a federal liaison who'd apparently taken an interest once the drone footage suggested potential interstate activity. They put together a file so thick it had its own spine, a stack of court-stamped affidavits matching digital timestamps, bank records, sworn statements, and the kind of photographic evidence that doesn't lie under oath. The first tangible win came on a gray Tuesday when Deputy Ramirez called with a voice that carried relief like an extra bullet. "We found Aaron," he said. "He's in Mississippi trying to board a private plane with a burner phone. We have him in custody." I told him to hold on to that breath and not spend it all at once. Aaron's arrest mattered. He was the muscle, the fixer who'd been at my fence line, the man whose truck had been seen on that dirt road the night my chickens vanished. With him off the streets, the immediate threat was reduced, but the map with 5 X's and the woman in black had taught me this wasn't about a single individual. It was a system. At the station, Aaron looked smaller in person than he did in the grainy footage defense of a man in a cheap hoodie trying to smirk away the fact that he'd been caught. The interrogations were methodical. Ramirez and the federal guys used the drone SD card footage, phone ping logs, and bank records to move from accusation to link. Aaron didn't last long under the pressure. He started giving names, some small, some large. He cursed, then he sang about transfers, shell companies, and an account that funneled payments labeled as community safety to a private security vendor. The vendor, a company that on paper did risk assessments. In practice, according to Aaron, it ran surveillance ops, hired muscle, and invoiced through local HOA treasuries. What Aaron revealed matched what Lena's Drive hinted at Merge, wasn't a local rumor. It was a coordinated scheme, private equity, dressed in neighborhood safety rhetoric, buying influence inside community boards, then weaponizing that influence. They identified properties on the fringe, applied pressure, and harvested them. The process had 1,000 tiny gears, complaint letters, bogus fines, drone surveillance, safety payments, and a cadre of people willing to scrub the paperwork. Once the paper trail was long enough, a developer or a project would buy in, and the land would be consolidated. While Aaron flipped, the county executed a set of follow-up warrants. They searched Merge-associated offices in 2 neighboring counties and a modest warehouse where a trove of drones, radio equipment, and flight logs was discovered. The flight logs had coordinates that matched timestamps from my cameras and others. A perfect lattice of wrongdoing. Investigators also pulled accounting records linking HOA dues to payments made to the shell company. The money wasn't large in any single transfer, but the pattern was undeniable. It was classic laundering by fragmentation, small amounts over time across different accounts labeled innocuously. The prosecutor moved fast. Indictments were drafted: conspiracy to commit harassment, unlawful surveillance, misappropriation of HOA funds, criminal trespass, attempted arson, pending more for the generator incident, and multiple counts of intimidation. Sabrina's booking already formed the opening chord. Aaron's arrest turned the score louder. The new warrants shifted the focus from a lone rogue HOA president into a web. And on the internet, the story shifted from a local scandal to a national cautionary tale. Media vans arrived with a kind of hungry politeness the following week. Brandon's channel was now small time in comparison to network crews, and that made me uneasy. The cameras meant protection, the public was watching, but they also invited a new kind of pressure pundits, with sound bites hosts eager to turn court documents into tribal narratives and viewers who wanted to be outraged but not necessarily invested beyond clicking share. Still, I let the cameras in. I wanted the truth loud. In court, Sabrina's arraignment drew a crush of people, local residents who had come forward, a few journalists, and a handful of YouTubers who smelled a story. She looked exhausted. The pearls hung crooked, an imperfect badge of the life she'd flaunted. Her lawyer argued procedural errors, jurisdictional ambiguities, and the plaintive line that would be repeated in op-eds. She was protecting community standards. It was nauseating to hear that phrasing after seeing the dead bird and the drone footage after Aaron's admission and the burned generator. But the judge set bail high and conditions strict: no contact, no HOA business, a court-ordered surrender of devices. For now, that meant a temporary pause on her operations. What gnawed at me was the quieter thread. The indictments exposed the tentacles. Merge's network included developers, at least one municipal liaison who'd smiled politely at HOA meetings, and contracted security consultants, some operating legally, some not. The task force brought in names that surprised me, people who'd been knighted by community awards and ribbon cuttings. It was a lesson in how deception wears a suit. Locally, the web of victims started to stitch itself together. Natalie Hart, whose horses had been poisoned last year, filed a supplemental statement under the new indictments. Vanessa Keene, who'd lost her garage to arson, testified about the box she'd found nailed to her tree. Rick Thomas, the rancher who'd gotten the threatening photos, agreed to stand with me in the pressers. Having their names in public filings moved the case from his farm to our community. There were wins that weren't legal paperwork, too. A farmer in a neighboring county, moved by the coverage, donated a new flock of chickens. "Call it restitution," he said, handing me crates with clucking birds that felt like a promise. Crowdfunded donations covered new infrared sensors, upgraded locks, and a legal fund to pursue civil claims. People who'd been silent for years came forward. One elderly couple, whose place had been quietly engulfed by code fines until they sold at a loss, returned to the media with photographs and bank statements. Their courage mattered. Their stories built pressure. But the woman in black, the messenger, or maybe scout, remained untraced. Her confidence, the way she'd left the envelope and then vanished into the trees, suggested she was operationally adept and deliberately anonymous. Whoever she worked for had the resources to move through the night without leaving obvious fingerprints. Aaron had been a local hired gun. She felt like a different kind of operator, someone who could slip through the thin places between official power and criminal enterprise. Late one night, a breadcrumb surfaced that made my skin crawl and gave the task force a fresh lead. One of Aaron's burner phones pinged a tower near a small municipal contractor's office the night the maps had been sent out. That contractor's name appeared on one Merge invoice. It was a tiny thread, but it suggested coordination at a higher level, someone sitting in suit meetings, signing off on budgets that eventually funded the drone flights and security staffing. I sat with Jonah in my kitchen and watched the newsreel from the raid for the 100th time. "We've exposed the head," he said, nodding toward the screen. "But we haven't severed the body." He was right. Arrests would rattle the network, indictments would slow some of the gears, and public scrutiny would make investors think twice. But systems adapt. Shell companies change names. Operatives learn to encrypt more cleverly. The woman in black could be rehired under a different call sign. So I kept watch. Cameras, backups, redundancies. I taught my dogs new patrol patterns. I printed out flight log timestamps and pinned them to corkboards. I answered the media's questions with the same line: "We have to pull the weeds so the roots stop coming back." It was a garden metaphor for a legal fight that looked more like trench warfare than tidy litigation. And then 2 nights after Aaron's indictment, a package came addressed not to me but to Jonah. It was a thin, padded envelope with a single sheet inside a business card. No logo, just a name: Evelyn M. Keene, and a phone number. The back had a scribbled note: "You have their attention. They are uncomfortable. Keep digging." The woman's handwriting matched none of the other letters we'd received. Evelyn wasn't a name I recognized. The number traced back to a prepaid SIM, But the card felt like a signal someone inside or someone sympathetic to the task force had reached out. It suggested the net was tightening. I sat back at the table, the card under my palm, and felt the familiar complicated wash of fatigue and focus. We'd won a battle, we'd rattled a network. Men in suits were probably sweating. But the map, the woman in black, and the whispers of Merge's higher-ups told me the end of one chapter was the start of another. There were more players with more pockets and more influence who wouldn't give up their scheme without a fight. If this thing was a chess match, we'd just taken a rook. Now, it was time to hunt the queen. The night the woman in black came back, I knew this thing had teeth beyond Sabrina and Aaron. It was quiet when the alert pinged my phone, camera 4, north fence, line motion detected. I sat up in bed, heart slamming against my ribs. The house smelled of coffee and the kind of tired that's been living inside you for months. Ranger lifted his head, eyes shuttered open like twin moons. Mocha's ears pricked. I shouldn't have been surprised. I'd learned to live by the pings and buzzes. Still, the hair on my arms rose. I booted the feed and watched. The figure moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, deliberate, efficient, barely glancing at the light she tripped. Her hoodie was black gloves on. She placed reflective red flags on every other fence post like a surveyor, then slipped a small packet into a hollow at the base of the gate and melted away into the trees. When she moved, the camera caught a flash of face, sharp cheekbones, eyes that didn't flicker. She was the kind of person who left no prints because she expected we wouldn't be watching. I grabbed my jacket, the shotgun I'd learned to shoulder with the same automatic motion I used to make coffee. Ranger came with me leash taut and ready. We crept along the side yard boots, whispering on gravel. The night was a blanket. The pasture grass whispered secrets when the wind cut through. I found the packet by the gate. The paper was folded, worn, and inside there was a flyer and an SD card. The flyer was simple, a typed message that read, "Phase 2 begins. Yield and save your homes. No signature. No logo. The kind of note that's meant to scare someone into making a choice. At the bottom of the flyer, someone had scrawled a map 5 X's. My heart clenched the moment my eyes landed on the big red X with number 5 circled. The SD card held a single-file aerial footage shot from high and slow. It panned over fenced properties, then zoomed into one particular house, with a red-roofed barn, an image I recognized, Natalie Hart's rescue. Then, a voice masked by static said, "We'll start with the ones who won't sell." The static made the words feel like a threat stitched through a speaker. The next morning, I took the flyer and the SD card straight to Deputy Ramirez. He read it, his jaw working like a man trying to swallow gravel. "We can't ignore this," he said. "This is escalation. Whoever sent this wants us to react. They want chaos." He called the task force in, and we sat in a small conference room, the kind with coffee stains and a whiteboard with dry erase markers. Jonah, the prosecutor Ramirez, and a federal cyber specialist crowded around the screen while the file played again. The voice on the tape was distorted, pitched low, but the cadence sounded practiced, someone who'd given orders before. From that day forward, my life felt like a chess match played in daylight and shadows. We upgraded everything. I brought in a licensed private investigator with drone jamming experience. He suggested setting decoy feeds and false GPS pings to confuse whoever was watching. We added thermal cameras to areas the cheap drones couldn't easily parse, and installed a secondary cloud backup in a separate region, less likely to be targeted. The donors who'd given money after Brandon's video funded a small command center in my barn. A couple of monitors, routers, an old desktop doing video stitching, and a whiteboard covered in cross-referenced timestamps, names, and phone numbers. But the psychological weight was the worst part. Images of burned coops, the generator rag, the dead sparrow, and the maps with red X's replayed in my mind like clips of a film being edited by someone else. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up and see the woman's eyes in the dark, calm, practiced. I found myself checking windows twice, walking the perimeter 3 times, and waking Jonah at odd hours with frantic updates about a pickup I saw 2 miles away. And yet beneath the fear, there was a hot, righteous clarity. The media attention had turned other victims into witnesses. Natalie, Vanessa, Rick, they were no longer isolated and ashamed. They were angry, cohesive, and armed with paperwork. The prosecutor convened a meeting where they laid out a strategy, press charges as broadly as we could, use the financial paper trail to freeze assets tied to merge affiliates. And this was vitally important. Prepare a civil class action suit on behalf of all the victims to attack the economic incentive structure that made merge profitable. You'd think that with courts and prosecutors on our side, the road would feel less rough. It didn't. The merge machine was adaptable. As investigators peeled away, one layer another would flicker. Shell companies changed names, bank accounts moved, a few contractors deleted logs and claimed data loss. Yet one strand remained stubborn and true people talk. One disgruntled bookkeeper, a farmer who resented being paid in hush fees, slipped us an invoice with a routing code that matched an account belonging to a regional developer. Another neighbor's trail camera had quietly caught a pickup, delivering what looked like feed, but inside was flight hardware. Piece by piece, the web unraveled. There were consequences in the neighborhood too. At a community meeting called by the county, residents poured in, some to speak their support, others to shout that the sheriff was overreaching. I stood up when it was my turn. Every time I spoke, I felt like I was pitching a rope across a canyon trying to pull folks back from the brink. This isn't about postage stamps or shed colors, I told them. It's about men who would buy influence and then build power on top of fear. They don't want your chickens. They want your deeds. They want to make this a patchwork of properties they can flip to developers. If you live near an HOA, if they encourage community standards without checks, you should be scared. Not everyone agreed. There were the usual murmurs, people who'd always trusted the HOA leadership, who thought a tidy mailbox was worth the peace it promised. That's the sneaky brilliance of a scheme like Merge. It sells itself as safety and order, as the carrot of a better neighborhood. And when something is sold as safety, people sometimes close their eyes to how much they pay to get it. One late night, Jonah called with news that made me sit down hard. "We serve subpoenas on a holding company in Houston," he said, excitement and caution tangled in his voice. "And we got a file, an internal memo. It mentions a pilot program for land consolidation, proof that Merge wasn't some rogue operation. They'd been testing scripts and templates for community integration in multiple counties." He let the sentence hang. "We now have direct corporate documents that tie the HOA payments to higher-level strategy." The legal team moved fast. The grand jury convened new charges, and the court allowed certain seized documents to be used as exhibits. For a moment, the momentum swung decisively toward us. The woman in black, the SD cards, the dead bird, they all became thread in a tapestry that prosecutors could use to show intent pattern and profit motive. But then, as if to remind me that these fights rarely end cleanly, a new wrinkle arrived. On a mail table inside my barn one morning, I found an envelope with the return address of a nonprofit I donated 2 years ago. It was a thin note. "Not all of us are on the same side. You've made them uncomfortable. Keep pushing. E." The initials matched Evelyn Keene's card Jonah had shown me after Aaron's arrest. Whoever Evelyn was, she wanted me to know someone on the inside was watching, and maybe, just maybe, helping. That fragment of hope felt like warmth in my sternum. It also worried me. If someone inside Merge or someone adjacent to the operation was willing to leak, the stakes had become higher. The players had shifted from hired hands and HOA presidents to corporate insiders and people who could steer contracts and hide transfers with executive memos. 2 weeks later at dawn, the county announced another round of raids, this time at a small municipal contractor's office and a storage facility tied to Merge affiliates. Cameras and media crews reported live. As boxes were carried out, chain of custody tags flapped in the wind. Some called it vindication. I called it another chapter in a long book that still had missing pages. Walking back to my truck that morning, I looked across my field at the fence where the red flags had been placed. A neighbor's kid skipped stones into the drainage ditches. The dogs rolled in the grass unbothered. For a rare second, the world held a semblance of normalcy. But the map with the 5 X's was still burned into my memory, and the woman in black had not been found. If Merge had a spine, we had started to snap vertebrae from it. If they had a reach, it had been shortened. But the reach still existed, patient and simmering. I understood then more than ever that victory wouldn't be a single dramatic moment. It would be the slow erosion of their incentive to keep doing this. The unraveling of finances, the public condemnation that made investors pull back. I also understood something personal. The fight had changed me. I had wanted peace. I had found purpose. Whereas before I'd measured days by sunrises and eggs, now I measured them with evidence logs and subpoena returns. I'd traded fields for filings, and in the bargain learned what standing one's ground costs. But if standing meant that other people, neighbors, ranchers, single moms with vegetable gardens might sleep without worrying if a drone would watch them at night, then I would pay that price 1,000 times over. The woman in black might still be out there, and the map might still hold more X's. But as cameras streamed the latest indictments and county vans rolled down the roads toward the next warrant, I felt something steadier under my boots, a community that woke up, dusted itself off, and said no. And that, more than any court order, was the thing that made the whole fight feel worth it. The day Sabrina pled guilty should have been a celebration. The courthouse buzzed like a hive of reporters' camera crews jostling for position. Microphones waved toward anyone who looked remotely connected. She wore a navy suit this time, Pearl's absent hair flat and dull. Her lawyer whispered furiously, but it didn't matter. She took a plea deal, misappropriation of funds, unlawful surveillance, criminal mischief. In exchange for reduced sentencing, she agreed to cooperate. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, her "Yes, Your Honor" sounded like glass cracking under weight. That moment was vindication, but it wasn't closure. Because Sabrina's testimony confirmed what we already knew, Merge was real structured and far-reaching. She admitted to weekly calls with regional liaisons, to following scripted escalation steps, to funneling HOA money into disguised accounts. She even confessed that Aaron hadn't been freelancing, he'd been on the payroll, his SUV gas and equipment expenses reimbursed through HOA petty cash. It was all written down, tidy, banal, evil. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the cold realization that Sabrina had only been a cog, an overconfident cog, yes, but replaceable. The real players sat in boardrooms, with polished tables sipping coffee, while instructing pawns to set fire to generators and drop dead birds on porches. That night, back at the ranch, I sat with Jonah on the porch. Ranger's head rested on my knee. Mocha snored at our feet. Jonah sipped whiskey from a dented flask. "We've rattled them," he said. "But don't expect them to vanish. They'll change names, shift tactics. What we need is to cut the money." How, I asked. "Civil suits," he replied. "Not just against Sabrina, against Merge. Freeze their assets, expose their contracts, make it unprofitable to terrorize people. That's how we win." So we filed a class action civil suit on behalf of myself, Natalie Vanessa Rick, and several others whose names had surfaced in the files. The claims were sweeping harassment, trespass, intimidation, conspiracy, destruction of property. The damages calculated into 7 figures. Our strategy wasn't just justice, it was deterrence. The media fed on every update. Brandon streamed from the courthouse steps. National outlets ran graphics of HOA horror with arrows pointing from my ranch to Merge's shell companies. My story became shorthand for everything Americans feared about HOAs: overreach, secrecy, corruption. But attention is a double-edged sword. For every supporter who mailed me letters of encouragement, another anonymous threat slithered into my inbox. One said, "Phase 3 is blood. Stop now." Another included a blurry photo of me at the feed store, time-stamped only 2 days before. Someone was still watching. Then came the fire at Vanessa's. It was 3 a.m. when the call jolted me awake. Her voice was ragged, panicked. They hit my garage again, bigger this time. I threw on clothes and raced over. Flames licked the sky, lighting up the pines. Fire trucks screamed, neighbors huddled in pajamas. Vanessa stood barefoot on her driveway, tears streaking her soot-stained face. The garage was gone, reduced to black skeleton beams. If the wind had shifted, her whole house would have gone too. The fire marshal pulled me aside later. "Accelerant," he said grimly. "This wasn't electrical." I clenched my fists. "Merge," he nodded. "We can't prove it yet, but I'd bet my badge." The message was clear. Even with Sabrina caged and Aaron arrested, the network still had claws. They wanted to show us that cooperation with prosecutors came with fire. Natalie doubled her security after that motion, lights, new locks, even a pair of guard dogs. Rick moved his kids temporarily to his brother's house across the county. As for me, I built my ranch into something bordering on a fortress. Cameras at every angle, thermal imaging, a legal jamming system, a shotgun at arm's reach. My nights were less about sleep than about waiting. 2 weeks later, the task force struck again, this time at Merge's regional office in Houston. The raid uncovered binders of contracts, memos detailing community consolidation initiatives, and correspondence with developers promising clean parcels. One memo even mentioned Oak Ridge Summit by name. Pilot project, demonstrates efficacy, replicate model. The walls were closing in on them. But then on a cool Sunday morning, I found something that reminded me just how bold these people were. It was taped to my barn door, a photograph of me asleep on the porch, shotgun across my lapdogs at my feet. The porch light gleamed off the coffee mug in my hand. The photo was taken from less than 10 feet away. Someone had walked past the cameras, past the sensors, past the dogs, and stood on my porch while I slept. I peeled the photo down with shaking hands. On the back in red ink, "You're never safe. We're already inside." That night I didn't pace. I didn't rant. I sat with Jonah, handed him the photo, and told him plainly, "We can't just defend anymore. We take this to the top. We cut the head off." The next morning, Jonah and the prosecutor filed a motion with the state attorney general. The evidence was overwhelming: illegal surveillance, interstate conspiracy, organized intimidation. They argued Merge was operating like a criminal enterprise, and under state law that meant RICO racketeering charges. It was ambitious. It was risky. But it was the only way to kill the monster, not just wound it. When the news broke, the internet lit up. Headlines screamed, "State pursues racketeering against HOA-linked group." People who'd once laughed at HOA drama now saw it for what it was, a syndicate wearing the mask of suburban order. For me, life didn't change much. I still walked the perimeter every night, still checked cameras, still woke at every creak. But I felt the tide turning. The courts were listening. The state was watching. And the network was bleeding under the weight of exposure. One evening, as I leaned against the porch rail ranger at my side, I let myself exhale for the first time in months. The land stretched quiet before me, the field silver in the moonlight. For a flicker, I remembered why I came here: to build peace with my own hands. Peace, I'd learned, isn't free. You fight for it, you bleed for it. You stand guard at the fence until the enemy gives up. And maybe, just maybe, we were finally close to that day. In the end, the lesson was simple, but heavy evil doesn't always wear a mask of chaos. Sometimes it wears pearls, carries a clipboard, and calls itself community standards. But when people stand together armed with truth, evidence, and a refusal to bow, no network, no scheme, no HOA gone rogue can survive the light of day. So to everyone watching, listening, or reading this, I'll say it straight: guard what's yours. If you ever feel small against a system, remember my story. Stand your ground. Expose the rot, because peace isn't given, it's defended. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from, and if you've ever fought back against something bigger than you. And don't forget to subscribe, because more stories like this are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.